Hi friends! Today I want to walk you through the steps of creating a quilted tote bag using a quilt block. In this case it's any 12.5 inch or 12-inch finished quilt block. The block I'm using today is from the summer block party. It is my Stripey Sales quilt block. If you are stumbling on this video maybe late in 2024, 2025, or even later and wondering where to get the pattern, I've linked it in the description. If you are watching this when it was posted, you can grab the Stripey Sales block pattern as part of summer block party through the link in the description as well. It's also on my blog. You'll also get a whole bunch of other fun quilt blocks with it designed by some of my really good quilty friends. So there is a video that walks you through making this part of the block. I will link that, so you might want to watch that first before you do that. If you don't want to do a sailboat, you can make, like I said, any 12.5 inch block. There are so many free block patterns on the internet. I've got a bunch of 12.5 inch block patterns on my site that I will link as well. So you've got lots of options. I want to walk you through some of the things I've done in preparation. The first thing I've done is I've added a 2.5 inch border to the outside of my block, which is two 12.5 by 2.5 inch pieces and two 2.5 by 16.5 inch pieces. If you're somebody that likes written instructions, if you hop on over to polkadotchair.com, again linked in the description, there is a blog post with all of this, and not only a blog post, but there is a print button. If you just scroll to the bottom, you can print it and have it by your keep it on your cutting table as you work. So that's the first thing that I have done, is I have added those borders. The second thing I did is I cut out a piece of Pellon Flex foam. This is single-sided fusible. It does not have to be fusible, but I'm using fusible because that's what I have in my house. I'd prefer not to use fusible, but if you have fusible, go ahead and use it. I'm going to make what is called a quilt sandwich. If you are new to quilting, the batting, or in this case the foam, is the sandwich, and then the fabrics are the bread, and you put them together and you make a quilt. One thing I should have done differently that I'm going to change in the directions, I cut my batting, or my foam piece, 17 by 17. This is 16.5 by 16.5. I should have cut it 18 by 18 just to give myself a little bit more wiggle room, and I had the space on the bolt. So when you do yours, you'll see that there's a little bit more, you'll notice you've got a little more leeway to play with. All right, so let's make this sandwich. First thing I'm going to do is lay down my background fabric. All these fabrics are from my Tulip Cottage collection with Riley Blake. We're going to pretend this is ironed. You definitely want to iron that before you move to this next step. Since I'm working with single-sided fusible, I'm going to put the fusible side facing the lining fabric. And then I am going to put my block on top. You don't need a lot of pins when you use foam because it's going to move around on you. I would probably, honestly, just probably put a pin, safety pin, in the two top corners to start, and then after that things are going to kind of start moving around, but you're just going to go with it. I have pressed my block in half. You can't see the press line very well, but I pressed it so that I could kind of see where to start stitching for my center line. So I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'll show you the setup there. And I'm going to stitch straight down here, and then I'm going to move out 1 inch on each side for my quilting. I think 1 inch is great for a tote bag, especially when you're using the foam. Half inch is kind of hard to stitch on that one. I definitely would keep it 1 inch or larger. You can go this way, you can go this way, you can go on the diagonal, totally up to you. But what you need to do is you're going to need two quilt blocks, one for the front of the bag, one for the back of the bag, and you need to make your sandwich, and then you need to quilt it. So I have my machine set up for machine quilting. I am using a walking foot. You definitely need a walking foot for this step. There's just too many layers. If you try and do this with a standard machine foot, I think you're going to be really unhappy with it. Walking foot just moves independently with the feed dog, so you can feed many layers of fabric in easily. I have the guide of my walking foot set at 1 inch, so I just use my ruler and just measured over 1 inch. I have the guide going down. I see it a lot of times going the other way once I put it on this way, and I just think it works so much better. I don't know if it's supposed to be that way, but that's how I like to do it. I am using a stitch length of 3, and I have my pieces, as I showed earlier, ready to go. And I have marked the center of this block. You can't see it very well, but I marked it with my iron. And then we're just gonna, so the most important thing is to get this first line straight, because after that we can use the guide. And so it's really simple. I've only got it pinned in a few places. Just start sewing. All right, my first line is done. Now we just need to use the guide. So I'm going to line up the guide on the existing stitching line and just keep stitching. And I'm actually going to lengthen my stitch length a little bit. I did that first line and I think it needs to go to 3 1/4. So I'm going to take it up to about 3 1/4. See if I like that any better. Just the stitches seem a little too close together. I like to always move the same direction to kind of help from getting puckers, and then we're just going to sew the next line. All right, then I will just keep going and stitching these lines in, and then we'll check back in and show you the next step. Here you can see my piece has been quilted. I need to quilt the second piece. The next thing I am going to do, which I'm going to actually do it off camera just because trimming this foam is, you need to put pressure on it, and I'm sitting down and I need to stand up. But you're just going to take your quilt ruler and your rotary cutter, and you're going to trim this and square it back up. Should be 16.5 by 16.5. If it's 16 by 16, that's okay. As long as it's square, it's a tote bag. At this point, the only thing that's important is that the front and the back pieces are the same. So quilt your other piece, and then trim both of them, and then we'll start assembling our bag. I have my pieces cut and trimmed. I went ahead and trimmed them to 15.5 by 15.5 because you do lose a significant amount of fabric because the foam is so thick, and with the border I thought that's what looked best. So the next thing you need to do is you need a ruler and a pen and some little scissors, and you need to come in and you just need to clip a 1-inch, sorry, wrong measurement. You need to clip a 1.5 by 1.5 inch square from the bottom 2 corners of your bag. Just making sure I've got that on the 1/2 inch. And what I usually like to do is mark this, cut the first one, and then use that as a guide for the other ones so that I know that it's the right for all of them. And I'm just double checking so it's 1/2 by 1.5 inches since I'm doing this on camera. All right, then we'll clip this out. All right, then you need, like I said, you need to do the same thing to this corner and then the bottom 2 corners on this piece as well. For the next steps, if you have binding clips, I think they're easier to use than pins. We're just going to place the 2 pieces front and back, or excuse me, place the 2 pieces right sides facing, and then clip them in place. And I would leave the walking foot on your sewing machine for the remainder of this tutorial. unless I tell you to take it off. One more clip. Got a bigger one, use that. Just want to make sure that your edges are even. All right, so we're all clipped. You're gonna go to your machine and you're just gonna stitch this in place. Use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. A 1/4 inch is not quite big enough, but a 1/2 inch is a little too big. So use about 3/8 of an inch. The important thing is that it is the same going all the way around. You're gonna sew this seam, and this seam, but you're not gonna sew in these corners. Now we need to bind the seam. So to do that, cut a bunch of 2-inch wide strips of your lining fabric. You don't have to cut them to length because we'll trim as we go. And what you want to do is just place this up at the top even with the edge, and then you're going to try your best to stitch right on that existing stitching line. Now we're going to cut the extra off. You can trim it more precisely later. And then bring it around to the other side. And fold it in. And then fold it in again. So that it covers that seam and it's tight. So I'll do most of this off camera so I can get it really tight, but you want to get that right there, nice and snug, and place a clip. So that's what it looks like from that side, and then what it looks like from this side. This is pinned, and you can kind of see how that is laying there. And then we're just going to come in and just going to shoot for sewing really close to that first fold, that fold of the fabric. Once you've got these bound, you need to finish these corners. So to do that, put your hand in the bag and kind of flatten this out so that those two, that side seam and the bottom seam, are on top of each other. Now, ideally, if this wasn't a bound seam, you would just kind of try and mush this to keep it from, to get it to sew. But what you're going to need to do, since you've got some bulk there, is you need to have these two parts of that seam going opposite directions. And I'm going to use clips again to clip this in place. Just, and like I said, ensuring that these two seams are right on top of each other so that your bag isn't out of square when you're done. Let me try a pin. And now we're going to sew this with that same seam allowance as before. All right, so that is sewn. You're going to sew the other side, and then you are going to bind them the same way you bound the other side. You're just going to want to make sure when you put that binding piece on that you fold it in so you don't have any raw edges. So you'll fold it inside and then fold it again and bind it. I've got the bag turned right side out. I've got my seams finished on the inside, and we are now ready to bind the top of the bag. We can use a similar, almost exact same method for binding the top of the bag as I do for the inside of the bag. I'm not gonna pin because sometimes when you're working with thicker fabrics like this, it's just easier just to kind of feed the fabric as you go. Gonna sew this around with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, flip it over and press and turn it under. And I'm going to do that at my ironing board instead of next to my sewing machine, because the steam from the iron is going to kind of help me get a nice crisp seam there. All right, this is folded over. I've got it inside out again. And what your goal is you want to get this folded edge as close to that seam line as you could. And one of my tricks for making this look good after you're done when you get ready to start sewing, is put some glue. This is the Sew Line glue pen. I use it all the time. And it's safe to use in your machine. If you have any problems with it after you change your needle, that might be the most problem I've had with it, is maybe you need a different needle afterwards, but I've never had a problem with it. You just want to get that on there and then glue that so that folded edge stays right on that seam. So then as you sew this, it's not going to move around on you. Now if you want to, if you're worried something is shifted, you can go back to your iron again and press this. Now, so it did distort a little bit right there. So I'm just going to push that back under and double check that. I think since there's bulk in this seam in the corner, I'm probably going to need, definitely make sure I've got some clips on those corners. Then you're going to come in and you're going to sew just on the inside. So it's going to show on this blue binding fabric. You're going to sew maybe 1/8 of an inch in. And if you've got that fabric fold close to that stitching line, it should catch all that fabric on the other side as you go. And if it doesn't catch it, it's okay. We can fix it. Not a big deal. Bag is now ready for handles. I'm making my handles leather. This is called a leather belt blank. You buy it at a craft store on a roll, and the intention is to be used for, like, you remember the kids used to do it and they would stamp all different leather stamps on there and make a belt. So that's what this is for, but they make really great bag handles and they're not expensive. So I have 2 pieces of leather cut to 25 inches long. To cut them, I just use scissors. I have a pair of old sewing scissors that are dull that I use to cut leather. I just drew an L on it, so to remind myself that's what those were for. That's all there is to it. So let's start with the leather part first. We're going to be attaching these to our bag using, they're called screw post, they're just called screw posts. They're brass plated. The ones I have are silver. I got them at Hobby Lobby. These came with a variety pack, and it's literally just 2 pieces that get screwed together to make a grommet. It's like so easy, but we do need to punch some holes. So first thing, our leather is 1 inch wide, and I want the hole to be in the center. So I am going to come up, I'm going to come up 1/2 inch. So I'm in 1/2 inch and over 1/2 inch, and then I'm just going to put a dot here. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. And I just leave these leather pieces raw, but if you want, you can get leather conditioner. It's not very expensive. It's just a lotion you can rub on it that kind of ages, gives the handles a nice patina. All right, so hopefully eyeballing it, this looks straight. Then you're going to need a tool called a crocodile. You can also, if you don't have one of these, you can use a awl and a hammer that are inexpensive. You can buy those at the craft store in the same aisle that you buy your leather. And then all I need to do then is just line up where this is and punch. That's literally all there is to it. Now we're gonna come over to our bag and we are gonna mark 3 inches in from the edge. So I'm coming in 3 inches. And you can kind of decide, like you might want to put this up here just to kind of see where it goes. I'm going to put the dot right below my binding there. So come in, comes down a little bit. All right, so you've got a couple of choices here. You can use the crocodile if you want. It will punch through this fabric, or you can use a seam ripper or an awl or a stiletto. You just need something kind of sharp just to get this started. And if everyone is like, oh, you're gonna fray your fabric, I've never had a problem with the fabric fraying, but if you're worried about it, get yourself a little bit of fray check and put it there. The other thing we need to do is we need to cut a little square from some plastic canvas. And the reason we need to do that is what will happen is this eventually will work its way out of the bag and pop through. So what this does is it kind of acts as a washer for the post and screw. All right, so now we are ready. So you're gonna poke this through here. All right, so that has poked through. What you do then, at first I like to do that, then I'm going to poke this through my leather, then I'm going to poke this through the bag, then use my flat plastic canvas, and you can trim the plastic canvas with your scissors after you're done with this so that it's smaller or not as noticeable. And then literally all there is to it is to just screw that in. And there you have got your leather strap attached to your bag. How easy was that? Quickly, making this in real time, so we're making decisions here on the fly. After I got that on, I decided I didn't really like the handle being that high, so I've moved my mark down to 1.5 inches from the bottom, from the top of the bag. I'm still coming in 3 inches from the side, and I'm gonna move my hole down here. Everybody that's like, oh no, you have a hole in your bag now. What I need to do, all I need to do is hit this with some fray check and steam it, and you won't even know that that hole is there afterwards. And it's gonna get covered by the top of the bag, by the top of the handle, and just personal preference, I prefer it that way. But as you do your bag, and in the instructions, I'll write to move this to 1.5 inches down. My bag is finished. I have the leather straps on. I have pressed it to get the nice crisp bottom. All you need to do is fold this and then steam it with your iron. This foam holds its shape really well, so if you're done, you're like, oh, that doesn't look exactly kind of like hers does, you might just need to come in and steam press it. For the handles, if it bothers you that these move back and forth, these little things come in packages. There's no reason you couldn't just add a second grommet. You can also buy these in smaller sizes. So if you want 2 of the post and screws, I would buy the smaller version of those for sure. If you have any parts of your leather that look kind of off, you can use an old pair of scissors to kind of rub that down. Also get some very inexpensive leather conditioner to put on there. I have been making purse strap handles this way for years, and I have never had any issues. This leather, it just looks nicer as you go. So let me know if you have any questions. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and if you have time, I would really appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. Really helps the channel out and to help me to know what kind of content to plan for you guys in the future.